Claire Bennett had never liked crowds. Even as a child, she would cling to her mother's coat in department stores. Eyes wide, shrinking from the noise, the bustle, the conversations she was too timid to join. At 26, not much had changed. Now, the crowds were dressed in business suits, armed with networking tactics instead of toys, and the stakes were her future. Tonight was supposed to be simple. Show up, smile, stay just long enough to be seen, and then slip out before anyone could ask her name. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. What Claire didn't expect, what no one could have expected, was that a simple seating mistake would unravel everything she thought she knew. Not just about herself, but about the very foundation of the company she worked for. It all started with a name tag. She had arrived intentionally late to Verdant Health Foods' annual gala, her hands still trembling from the anxiety she couldn't shake off in the Uber. When she approached the check-in table, a flustered young intern glanced up, handed her a small envelope with her name in elegant calligraphy, and waved her toward the ballroom. She never noticed that her seat number 17 had a tiny smudge, making the 1 look like a 7. It didn't seem important. Not at the time. The ballroom at the Grand Alder Hotel was like something out of a magazine spread. Crystal chandeliers glistened above linen-draped tables, and classical strings whispered through hidden speakers. Everyone seemed to already know everyone. Laughter echoed from polished corners. Glasses clinked, and Claire's entrance went unnoticed exactly how she preferred it. She spotted table 17 or so, she thought, near the tall arched windows overlooking the city skyline. Only one seat was unoccupied. A man sat beside it, older, refined, with a calm posture and a drink in his hand. His suit was impeccably tailored, but his expression was soft, contemplative, like he wasn't quite part of the party either. "Excuse me," Claire said softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the room. "Is this seat taken?" He looked up slowly, and in that moment, Claire felt a flicker of surprise. His eyes weren't judging. They were kind, curious, present. "Not at all," he said with a quiet smile. "Please." She slid into the chair, exhaling as discreetly as she could. He didn't seem like the type to make small talk for the sake of it. For that, she was grateful. "You don't look like someone who loves these events," he said after a few moments, his voice warm, but unobtrusive. Claire let out a dry chuckle. "Is it that obvious? I've been practicing that same face for 20 years, he said, raising his glass slightly. "You're among friends." The tension in her shoulders softened. It was rare to meet someone who didn't expect her to perform or impress. She wasn't even sure why she started talking as much as she did next. Maybe it was the champagne, maybe it was the music, or maybe it was just that, for the first time in a long time, she felt safe. "I'm Claire," she said. "Marketing department." He nodded slowly. "James. I've been around Verdant for a while." She couldn't place his name. No last name, no title. He didn't offer more. She assumed he was an advisor or someone from a regional office. He didn't dress like the executives, but he didn't carry himself like middle management either. It didn't matter. His presence was grounding. When he asked what she'd change about Verdant, if she could, Claire hesitated. She had opinions. Of course, ones she had kept carefully buried, but something about the sincerity in his voice, the way he listened without interrupting, pulled her walls down. "We hide the truth," she said finally. "The real story, the farmers, the actual work being done, it's all there, but we dress it up so much it doesn't even feel authentic anymore. It's like we're scared the truth isn't good enough on its own." James didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned his glass slowly in his hands, then looked at her with something more serious in his eyes. "You think truth still matters to people?" "I think it's the only thing that ever really did," she said, before realizing how bold that sounded, but he didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss her. Instead, he said, "That's a rare answer, and a brave one." They talked for nearly 45 minutes. Claire forgot to check the time, forgot about her carefully planned fake emergency call, forgot the gala around her altogether. It was the first time in years she felt like her voice had weight, like her thoughts weren't just echoing in her own head. And then it happened. The lights dimmed. The host took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "thank you for being here tonight is special. Please welcome the man who built Verdant Health Foods from a kitchen counter to a global force, founder and CEO, James Whitmore." Claire froze. The man beside her stood up, adjusted his cufflinks, and calmly made his way to the stage. Her breath caught. No. James Whitmore, CEO." The entire room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. Claire sat motionless at the now empty table, her hands ice-cold, her face burning with realization. She had just spilled every raw, unfiltered thought about the company to the man who ran it. He hadn't told her, hadn't stopped her, hadn't even hinted. He just listened. The next 40 minutes were a blur. James, or Mr. Whitmore, as she now realized, spoke about the company's future, announced a new transparency initiative, and promised more direct engagement between leadership and staff. But Claire barely heard it. Her mind raced. "What had," she said, "how much damage had she done?" As the speech ended, he looked briefly in her direction. Their eyes met across the ballroom, just for a second. He smiled, not a smirk, not a knowing grin, a real, genuine smile. And then he turned back to the crowd leaving Claire with 1,000 questions and a heart pounding so loudly it echoed in her ears. What had just happened? She came to the gala hoping to remain invisible, but somehow, by sitting at the wrong table, she may have changed everything. Claire barely slept that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the city lights spilling across her apartment, walls like flickering memories. Her mind replayed every moment of that conversation, dissecting every word she said to the man she now knew wasn't just some friendly guest by the window. He was James Whitmore. The James Whitmore, CEO, founder, and visionary behind Verdant Health Foods. And she had told him everything, every frustration, every doubt, every uncomfortable truth she had spent years locking away. She had always prided herself on staying under the radar, speak only when spoken to, keep your head down, let your work speak for itself. But last night she hadn't just spoken, she'd bared her heart to the man who had the power to make or break her career. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a calendar invite titled Meeting with James W. It was scheduled for 3 p.m. No subject, no details, just a quiet summons from the top. Claire stared at the screen for a full minute before her breath returned. At work, the whispers were already swirling. Everyone was talking about the CEO's surprise appearance at the gala. The internal blog was buzzing about a new direction. Transparency, authenticity, real voices. The language echoed what she had said the night before, almost word for word. But that couldn't be, could it? She passed James Whitmore in the hallway just before noon. He didn't stop, didn't draw attention, but as he walked by, he gave her a small nod. Subtle, intentional. Claire's stomach flipped. He hadn't forgotten by the time 3 o'clock arrived. She had rehearsed a dozen apologies in her head, each one more nervous than the last. She didn't know if she was being thanked or fired. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt eternal. The hallway was silent. A soft chime announced her arrival as the receptionist led her to a glass-walled conference room with a view that made the city look like a model. And there he was, standing at the far end of the table, hands tucked into his pockets, smiling as if this were the most casual thing in the world. "Claire," he said warmly, "thanks for coming." "Of course," she replied, trying to steady her voice. "I wasn't sure if I should. I was hoping you would," he said. "Have a seat." She sat. He didn't sit across from her. Instead, he walked to the side and pulled up a chair, close enough to speak softly, far enough to keep her comfortable. "You said something last night," James began, "that I haven't heard from anyone on my executive team in a very long time. You told me the truth, unfiltered, honest, and more importantly, you said it with care." Claire blinked, unsure what to say. "I built Verdant on the idea that real food could come from real people doing real work," he continued. "But somewhere along the way, as we grew, that truth got dressed up, sanitized, turned into a story instead of a reflection. You reminded me of that." She hadn't expected this. She had come prepared for damage control, not praise. "I'm not saying everything changes overnight," James said, his tone thoughtful, "but I want to start something, and I want you to be part of it." "Me?" Claire's voice cracked slightly. "Yes, I want to hear more from the people like you, ones who don't usually speak up, not because they have nothing to say, but because no one thinks to ask." He paused. "I'm building a small team, a think tank. Internal voices that challenge, test, push back, tell the truth. I want you on it." Claire was silent, the weight of the moment anchoring her. "I'm not asking for a yes right now," he said gently. "Just think about it. But if you do agree, know this: you won't be invisible anymore. That comfort zone you've mastered, it won't exist here." She nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." "I hope you do," he said, rising. "Because last night, someone reminded me that the truth still matters, and that someone might just change this company." Claire left the meeting with her heart thudding so loudly she barely heard the receptionist thank her. Her fingers tingled, her chest felt light. She had walked into that room expecting judgment, and walked out with something she hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. But as the elevator doors closed, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen next, because one conversation had brought her into the CEO's world. Now, the question was, could she survive in it? She almost said no. For 2 days, Claire paced her apartment floor, heart warring with reason. She wasn't used to attention, wasn't built for boardrooms or brainstorming with powerful people. She had chosen her quiet, behind-the-scenes path, for a reason. No spotlight, no speeches, just data, insights, strategy from the shadows. But something about that conversation, something about the way James had looked at her, not with expectation, but with belief, had shaken the foundation she'd carefully built around herself. She kept thinking back to that moment at the gala, the way he had listened, really listened. Not as a CEO, not even as a boss, just as a human being. It had felt safe, and oddly powerful. The email came late Friday evening. Subject: Verdant Insight Project. Your voice matters. From James Whitmore. Body: Claire, I hope you're ready. Monday morning, 9 a.m., 17th floor. No script, just honesty. Welcome aboard. She hadn't even said yes yet. And somehow, it was already happening. Monday came too quickly. The 17th floor was nothing like the rest of the building. No cubicles, no buzzing fluorescent lights. It was bright and calm, filled with living plants, art from local communities, and floor-to-ceiling windows that stretched like open hands across the skyline. For a wellness company, it actually felt ... well. She found herself standing outside a frosted glass conference room labeled simply, The Studio. Inside were 5 people she didn't recognize, diverse in age, background, and energy. One had tattoos up both arms and wore a faded Verdant warehouse shirt. Another looked barely out of college, sketching notes with a yellow pencil on actual paper. The other smiled, nodded politely. She was the last to arrive. James walked in right after her, no assistant, no clipboard, no announcement. Just a steaming mug of tea and that same calm presence. "Welcome," he said, taking a seat not at the head of the table, but the middle. "You're all here because you said something real when no one else did. This isn't a committee. This isn't a performance. This is a conversation, and we're going to start today by listening." Claire sat, her hands knotted in her lap. He turned to her first. "Claire, will you tell everyone how we met?" Heat rushed to her cheeks. Every eye turned to her. This was exactly what she had feared, but then she remembered the man who hadn't judged her. The conversation that hadn't felt like an interrogation. She inhaled. "I sat at the wrong table," she said softly. "That's it. I wasn't supposed to be there, but I spoke honestly because I didn't think it mattered. I thought I was talking to someone who couldn't change anything." James nodded, and now she paused. "Now I'm afraid that I might." There was a silence, then a quiet ripple of laughter around the table, not mocking, but understanding. The others introduced themselves. Sophia from customer service, Matteo from distribution, Priya from sustainability, Marcus, a former intern who was now helping write community outreach programs. All of them had, at some point, challenged something inside the company, and, instead of being ignored, they'd been brought here. The idea was simple. Every week they'd meet and talk about what wasn't working, what needed to be said, what others were afraid to say. Their job wasn't to solve it all, it was to speak, honestly, boldly, safely, and for the first time, Claire saw a crack of light in a company she thought had gone dark behind branding and polished taglines. But it wasn't all calm and hopeful. Not everyone liked this new direction. By Wednesday, whispers started to circulate. Aganoni this time. Her name was attached. Who does she think she is? Isn't she the shy one from marketing? CEO's new favorite? Must be nice. She caught side glances in the break room. Conversations that stopped when she entered, and then there was Carolyn. Carolyn Brooks was the senior director of marketing and Claire's direct boss. Sharp, poised, and territorial. She hadn't acknowledged Claire's promotion to the insight team, not once. Until that Friday, Claire was at her desk, catching up on reports when Caroline appeared. A smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes. "Claire," she said sweetly, "heard you've been invited to James's little round table." Claire blinked. "Yes, I have." Caroline tilted her head. "Interesting. No formal memo, no updated hierarchy. Yet somehow, you've jumped the line." "I didn't ask." "Oh, I'm sure you didn't," Caroline interrupted, voice still syrupy. "But just a friendly reminder, visibility is a double-edged sword. It brings praise, and it attracts expectations, especially if people think you're influencing leadership decisions." She left without waiting for a reply. Claire sat frozen, her hands trembling slightly. That voice in her head, the one she'd been silencing, came roaring back. "You don't belong here." But later that afternoon, as Claire packed her things to head home, her inbox dinged. Subject: Truth has power. From James Whitmore. Body: "You're doing more than speaking. You're being heard. Don't stop." She read it twice, then again, and in that moment, she realized something that surprised her. She wasn't afraid of the spotlight anymore, not because it had gotten easier, but because now, when she stepped into it, she wasn't doing it alone. The next week, she would say something that no one else dared to, and it would start a ripple so wide, the entire company would feel it. But for now, Claire smiled to herself, stepped into the elevator, and whispered the words she'd never dared to believe before. "Maybe I do belong here." It started with silence. Not the kind that fills a quiet room or lingers after someone finishes speaking, but the kind that says everything by saying nothing. It happened during a Thursday morning meeting with the senior marketing team. Claire wasn't even supposed to be there. She had just stopped by to drop off an internal report on consumer engagement trends, something she'd spent all week perfecting. Her name wasn't on the calendar invite. Her seat wasn't at the table. But Caroline's assistant had asked her to stay in case any clarification was needed. No one asked. No one even looked at her. Not until slide 5 of the presentation. When Caroline spoke the words Claire had written, almost exactly, Claire sat straighter. Her fingers twitched. It wasn't the first time Carolyn had borrowed content from her team, but this was different. These weren't just numbers. These were the exact insights Claire had presented at last week's Insight Studio session. With James refined into a strategic pitch now being delivered by someone else, word for word, and no one in the room knew. Claire's eyes met Caroline's, who offered the smallest smile. It was the kind of smile that said, "What are you going to do about it?" Claire wanted to speak up. Her throat tightened. Her hands grew clammy. But that old fear returned with a vengeance. What if she was wrong? What if she caused a scene? What if the room turned on her? The meeting ended, people clapped. Caroline thanked everyone and walked out with the confidence of someone who had just earned another win. Claire remained seated, heart pounding, disappointment heavy on her chest. Back on the 17th floor, James was scribbling notes on a whiteboard in the studio when she walked in. He looked up immediately. Something's wrong. Claire hesitated. You don't have to tell me, he added gently. But you're allowed to. She sat for a moment. She didn't say anything, and then she did. I watched someone else get credit for my voice, she said, her voice low but steady. I sat in a room full of people who didn't know the words they were praising were mine. I've never spoken up before. But now that I've started, I can't unsee it. James listened silently. I don't want credit for the sake of ego, she continued. I want to believe the truth matters, not just when it's convenient. He nodded. Who was it? She hesitated again, but this time she didn't hold back. Caroline. A pause. Then James said something that would shift everything. We're not going to play by those rules anymore. He didn't call HR. He didn't set up a formal complaint. Instead, he made a decision, one that would shock everyone in the following week. He invited Claire to co-present at Verdant's quarterly town hall. Standing beside him as he announced the launch of the company's Truth in Branding campaign, he introduced her as one of the minds behind the initiative. Not someone helping, not someone supporting. One of the minds. The email announcement hit company inboxes 2 days later. Caroline didn't reply to it, but she did show up outside Claire's office that afternoon. You went above me, Caroline said, her tone clipped. No, Claire said, quietly standing her ground. I spoke to someone who asked me to be honest. You're walking into rooms you're not prepared for. Claire held her gaze. Maybe, but I'm not walking out of them anymore. That was the beginning of the shift. Not just for Claire, for the entire culture at Verdant. Suddenly, new ideas started coming from places no one had looked before. Junior staff, warehouse managers, interns. James began holding weekly open forums where anyone could speak. The marketing team restructured its process to allow anonymous input on campaigns. The Insight Studio became more than a meeting, it became a movement. But with change came resistance. A senior VP resigned. Others questioned James's leadership style. Rumors swirled that the new direction was too idealistic and unsustainable. The board grew restless. And in the middle of it all stood Claire, still shy, still uncertain sometimes, but no longer invisible. She began mentoring younger employees who had been too nervous to share their voices. She reviewed campaign drafts. With a focus on truth over polish, she led a workshop titled Real is Enough. And to her surprise, the room was packed. Then came the call. James was scheduled to speak at a national business summit. CEOs, investors, and global leaders would be in the room. 2 days before the flight, he walked into the studio and said, I want you to come with me. Claire's eyes widened. Me? I don't want to talk about Verdant from the top down, he said. I want people to hear the story from the person who reminded me why we started in the first place. She stared at him, speechless. You don't need to impress anyone, he said softly. Just tell the truth, like you always do. That night, she stood in her tiny kitchen holding the boarding pass with shaking hands. 1 month ago, she had walked into a gala hoping to vanish. Now she was about to stand on a stage and speak to the world. What she didn't know yet. What no one knew is that what she said at that summit wouldn't just change how people saw her. It would change how people saw Verdant, and it would force one powerful figure to make a choice between protecting a comfortable lawyer standing with the quiet voice that refused to stay quiet any longer. She had never stepped onto a stage like this before. The lights were brighter than she expected, hot and sharp, like they could see straight through her. The auditorium was silent, filled with hundreds of professionals from around the country, their eyes locked on the stage where 2 chairs waited, one for her, one for the CEO. The event coordinator had called it a fireside chat, but it felt more like walking into a storm she wasn't trained to survive. Claire stood just behind the curtain, clutching the notes she hadn't even looked at since the flight. Her palms were sweating, her breath shallow. James stood beside her, calm as ever, glancing over the audience like he'd done this 1,000 times. Because he had. You okay? He asked gently. I feel like I'm going to forget how to speak, Claire admitted. You won't? He said, with quiet certainty. You're not here to perform, you're here to tell the truth. And that's something you've always done better than anyone. She nodded, heart racing. Then the host announced them, and they stepped into the light. Applause rose. Not thunderous but polite, professional. Claire followed James to the chairs, trying to remember every grounding technique her therapist had ever taught her. She sat, faced the crowd, looked down at her notes, then folded them quietly and placed them beside her. James introduced her, with sincerity, no exaggeration, no fluff. Just the real story. How she accidentally sat at the wrong table. How she spoke from the heart. How her words sparked a shift in Verdant's leadership. He didn't frame her as a token employee success story. He framed her as a truth teller. And then he turned to her, microphone in hand, and asked the question that changed everything. Claire, what did you think about our company before you sat at that table with me? The room stilled. Every instinct screamed to say something safe. Something vague, something nice. But Claire didn't come all this way to play safe. I thought it had lost its voice, she said calmly. I thought Verdant had started speaking through scripts instead of people. I thought we were selling ideals instead of reflecting them. The room didn't move, and I didn't say that because I thought anyone would listen. I said it because I couldn't keep pretending it was okay anymore. I care about this company, and I care about the people who believe in it. But belief without truth isn't strength, it's just silence. There was a pause, then a subtle shift in the energy of the room, like air filling a space that had been too tight for too long. The moderator leaned in. What happened when you spoke up? Claire smiled slightly. Nothing at first. Then, everything. She talked about the Insight Studio, the team built from voices that had been overlooked. She talked about the ripple effect, how one conversation had become 100, how it wasn't easy, how some leaders had pushed back, how culture only changes when people decide to stop playing roles and start being human again. By the time she finished, something in the room had changed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. People clapped, and not because they were expected to, but because they believed her. After the panel, executives and founders approached her. Some offered congratulations. Others asked quiet, honest questions. One woman, a VP at a competing wellness brand, pulled Claire aside and said, "You reminded me why I started in this industry. Thank you." But not everyone was moved. Back home, within hours of the summit, a board member raised concerns over Claire's unauthorized public commentary. An anonymous internal memo questioned whether lower-level voices should be representing the company at external events. It was carefully worded, cloaked in professionalism, but the message was clear. Stay in your lane. James called her into his office the next morning. His expression was unreadable. They're pushing back, he said, harder than I expected. Claire stayed quiet. They're worried we're exposing too much, he continued. That authenticity will make us vulnerable. That being real means being weak. She looked up. And what do you think? He leaned back in his chair. I think the most dangerous lie we've ever told is that perfection sells better than truth. He looked tired, not defeated, just aware, like someone who knew the cost of doing the right thing and was still willing to pay it. But then came the real twist. James opened an email on his screen and turned it toward her. It was a resignation letter. Caroline's, I received this morning, he said. No explanation, just the letter. Claire blinked. I didn't ask for this. I know, and that's why you earned it. She read the letter once, then again. It wasn't celebratory. It didn't feel like a win. It felt heavy. She could have changed too, Claire said quietly. She had the chance, James replied. That night, James posted a public statement on Verdant's site and social platforms. It was simple, bold, clear. We believe that truth, even when uncomfortable, builds trust. We will not retreat from that belief. Verdant belongs to the people who carry it forward with honesty, compassion, and courage. This is the future we choose. Claire read it over and over, not because she doubted it, but because it still stunned her that someone at the top would say it out loud. In just a few weeks, everything had shifted. She had gone from a silent analyst to the face of a movement she never asked to lead. This wasn't about being seen, it was about seeing each other. And as she prepared for the next team session in the studio, she noticed something different. More people coming in, more chairs pulled up, more voices. Once quiet, now rising. The wave was growing, and Claire, once the girl who hid at the edge of every room, was now at the center of something no one could ignore. It was never about being famous. It was never about power, or applause, or even promotion. Claire had spent most of her life avoiding attention, mastering the art of being unnoticeable. But now, people she had never met were calling her name in elevators, stopping her in hallways, emailing her just to say, "Thank you for saying what we couldn't." She didn't expect to become a symbol. She didn't even like that word. But over the past few months, her voice had become more than just her own. It had become a doorway, one that others were finally walking through. And yet, it was also the moment when the cracks began to show. With Verdant's new direction and momentum picked up quickly. Departments began submitting real stories for campaigns. Warehouse workers were featured in national ads. Customer feedback, once filtered and polished, was now posted with honest responses, even when it stung. The transparency initiative had taken root. But with every step forward, the resistance grew louder. A faction on the board pushed back, citing brand risk and shareholder unease. They questioned the influence Claire held. They called her untested, unvetted, an emotional decision. Some even suggested that James had lost his edge, that he was letting one employee's idealism drive a billion-dollar company toward instability. One leaked comment said it plainly, "She's a nice story, but nice stories don't lead businesses." Claire read it the morning before the next all-hands meeting. She didn't cry, she didn't shake, but she did sit in her car, an extra 5 minutes, holding her breath against the weight pressing on her chest. That afternoon, James asked to see her. "They want you out," he said simply. Not fired, just moved quietly, away from the table. She looked at him, searching for the catch. "And you?" "I told them if your voice isn't in the room, neither is mine." Silence sat heavy between them. I can fight this, he continued, but I need to know it's still worth it to you, because they'll make this hard. For both of us. Claire stared out the window at the city below. Just a few blocks away was the hotel ballroom where this all began, where she had sat at a table that wasn't hers and unknowingly set everything in motion. I didn't ask for any of this, she whispered. I know. But now that it's here, I can't look away. I can't go back. James nodded. Then we go forward. The board meeting was scheduled for the following week. Rumors swirled about a leadership vote, a potential restructuring, even whispers of James stepping down. The Insight Studio team felt the tension. The culture Claire had helped spark felt like it was hanging in the balance. But what happened next surprised everyone. Claire didn't stay silent. Instead of retreating, she requested a spot on the board's agenda. Officially, no side doors, no whispers, and she got it. The room she walked into was sleek, cold, and expensive. No plants, no music, just long tables and sharper glances. The men and women who had ruled the company for decades sat around her, some curious, others indifferent, a few openly impatient. Claire stood. She didn't bring notes. She didn't rehearse. I'm not here because of strategy, slides, or case studies. She began. I'm here because I sat at the wrong table, and I told the truth to someone I thought didn't matter. A pause, and he listened. She told them about the studio, the change it had sparked, the employee engagement stats that had gone up, the turnover rates that had gone down, the customers who finally felt heard. But beyond numbers, she said, her voice clear. This is about what we stand for. If we say we believe in wellness, in authenticity, in people, then we can't be afraid of letting those people speak. And we can't punish the voices that tell us what's hard to hear. One board member leaned forward. And what if we lose revenue because of it? Claire didn't flinch. Then we lose it with integrity. And we rebuild stronger because the trust will stay. She didn't speak for long, maybe 7 minutes. But she spoke like every word mattered. Like she wasn't defending herself, but defending everyone who had ever been told to stay. Quiet for the sake of keeping things comfortable. When she finished, the room was still. James looked proud. A vote followed. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. The Insight Studio stayed. Claire stayed. So did the vision. Months later, Verdun rolled out its largest campaign yet, Real Roots. It featured everyday employees, suppliers, farmers, and customers. Claire narrated the closing voiceover. Her name appeared in the credits. Small but visible. She didn't want it any bigger. And something extraordinary happened. The campaign didn't hurt the brand. It exploded it. Customer loyalty rose. Investors took notice. Even other corporations reached out to learn from Verdun's transformation, and Claire kept working, still humble, still thoughtful, but not hiding anymore. One afternoon, she returned to that same hotel ballroom where it all began, this time as a guest speaker for a leadership panel. The same chandeliers sparkled. The same windows framed the skyline. But this time, she wasn't trying to disappear. She sat at table 17 again, intentionally this time, alone for a moment. Reflecting then, someone approached her, a young woman, with a nervous smile, clutching a glass of water. Is this seat taken? Claire looked up, smiled gently. Not at all. Please. The girl sat down, exhaled softly, and said, I almost didn't come tonight. I'm not good at these kinds of things. Claire nodded. Neither was I, but the wrong table can sometimes be the start of the right story. And with that, the cycle quietly began again. Not because of fate, but because one voice once buried refused to stay silent, and helped the world remember that the truth still belongs in the room.